The river did not move. It shimmered under morning light like stretched glass, wide and perfect, too perfect. No wind touched its surface. No leaves drifted across it. No insects skimmed its skin. It had not frozen. It had refused. Rotvar stood at its edge, staring into water that mirrored more than sky. His own reflection stared back with too much weight in its eyes. The mark on his palm, the faint spiral, glowed softly beneath the skin, like a secret he hadn't finished carrying. He bent down, touched the water with 2 fingers. It was warm, not blood warm, breath warm. As if something beneath it had lungs and knew he was here. He didn't recoil. Not anymore. Behind him, the land sloped upward into old hills, where forests tangled like closed fists. The village he'd left behind was 2 valleys west, still whispering about the night the silence broke and what walked out of it. Now he walked again, but not to reach something, to follow. The river had no current, yet it drew him, not its path, its pause. There were no boats, no bridges, just a flat stone near the shore, set deeper into the mud than natural. Its surface bore markings not carved, but worn in as though hundreds of hands had pressed it gently for generations. He stepped onto it. Nothing happened. Then he looked down. His reflection was gone, not faded, not blurred, gone. In its place, a handprint palm up beneath the surface. Not a real hand. A shape, waiting. The spiral on his palm warmed. He knelt, touched the water again. This time it accepted him. The river opened. Not parted, but revealed. The stone underfoot pulsed once, then shimmered, and the illusion of water was pulled back like skin from an old scar. Beneath the surface, not sand, not mud, bones, thousands, not piled, arranged. Spines like bridges, ribs like steps, skulls staring upward not in fear, but in warning. Each one bore a symbol carved across the forehead. Different, but all part of the same language. The river had been a tomb, a barrier, a memory held in water. Rotvar stood in its center, ankle-deep in warmth that was no longer water, staring at a path made of the dead, and far ahead, past the bend in the river, something waited, not hidden, just patient. Part 2. When stones begin to sing. The bones did not break underfoot. They yielded, not like flesh, but like memory. Rotvar stepped between ribs and spines, each motion deliberate, each pause laced with the fear of forgetting where his feet were placed. Skulls faced upward, their jaws open, their hollow eyes filled with sediment and shadow. Not a single crow circled the sky. Even the wind held itself outside this corridor of death. He was not walking across a battlefield. He was walking through a warning. The water, or what pretended to be water, lapped gently at his boots, as if to remind him it was still there, still watching, still waiting for him to slip and fall deeper than drowning could reach. Far ahead, past the bend, the fog had thickened, but not naturally. It coiled in deliberate rings, wrapping around something tall, rooted, unmoving. A figure, a tree, a monument? He could not yet tell. He moved forward. Each step birthed a whisper soft, beneath hearing, like the sound of breath escaping old wood. It wasn't in the air. It was in his ribs. His heartbeat began to slow, not from fear, from alignment. The further he walked, the more the spiral on his palm warmed. And when he looked down again, he saw that some of the skulls now bore that spiral etched shallowly into their brows. That hadn't been there before. He knelt beside one. Its bone was smooth, but worn, a child perhaps, or someone too young to carve their own name into the world. He touched the spiral with his fingers. It pulsed, and the fog ahead moved, not shifted, reacted, as if acknowledging him. The thing in the mist took form now. Not a tree, not a monument, a statue. Enormous, ancient, bent forward slightly, one hand over its heart, the other extended, palm up as if offering something, or waiting to receive. Rotvar approached, eyes locked on the stone face. It was eroded by time, but not destroyed. The features were familiar in shape, but foreign in meaning, a face not designed to be worshipped, but to be understood. The base of the statue was submerged. Bones lay around its feet, arranged not in chaos, but in ritual. As if each had stepped forward and placed themselves there, willingly. He reached the extended hand. Its surface bore 7 grooves, lines, channels, each leading toward the fingers like veins. As he traced one of them with his palm, a voice entered the air. Soft, not male, not female. Ancient, but not tired. "You have walked into what we buried. Will you bury it again?" Rotvar stared at the hand, and then at his own. The spiral glowed. "If this land remembers," he said, "then let it remember me too. Not as a name, but as a wound that never closed." The statue pulsed a single vibration, deep through the water, up through his bones, and somewhere behind the clouds, something old exhaled. The grooves in the stone hand began to fill, not with water, with light. Part 3, the hand that never closed. The grooves filled with light not radiant, not divine. Dim, colorless, warm. Like the last breath of a candle snuffed in a forgotten chapel. Rotvar stepped back from the hand. The light didn't burn. It pulsed. Each pulse matched the spiral on his palm, which now throbbed not like pain but like memory resurfacing. He knew better than to fight it. The statue's face turned. Not physically. Not stone, but presence. What once felt carved now felt aware. The mist around the monument lifted in thin spirals, revealing more half-buried stones, arranged in tight concentric circles around the statue's base. On each a different symbol, lines, eyes, arrows, mouths sewn shut. Rotvar slowly walked the outer ring. He didn't know what he was looking for, but the ground did. Beneath one of the stones, something pulsed back. He knelt, dug with bare hands. The soil came away too easily, as though it had always wanted to give this up. His fingers touched wood, not decayed, preserved. A box, small, smooth, cold, even in the warm soil. He lifted it. It bore no lock, only a single carved spiral inverted. He opened it. Inside a tooth, long, black, not human. Alongside it, a small braid of hair, tied with a thread of gold, and a shard of something like bone, etched with writing so small it could not be read, only felt. And the moment the box opened, the light in the statue's hand vanished. The mist stopped spiraling. The air held its breath. Rotvar rose. "What is this?" he asked aloud. The answer came not as sound, but as presence. All around him, the bones in the riverbed began to shift. First a finger, then a jaw, then dozens. The water stilled perfectly flat, and then it whispered, "You opened the vow." The voice did not come from above. It came from below, from beneath the bones, from something that had listened for centuries. Rotvar stepped back toward the statue. What was vowed? No answer, only ripples. Beneath his feet, the skulls now faced the statue, their mouths open, as if in silent prayer or warning. He held the box higher. The spiral on his palm dimmed, not from rejection, but as if yielding. The inverted spiral on the box now pulsed faintly in return. A dialogue without sound. He looked to the hand of the statue, still outstretched, still waiting, still open. He stepped forward and placed the box upon the stone palm. It sank slightly into the groove, fitting as though it had always belonged there. The light returned, but this time it surged up the statue's arm across its chest, through its throat until it reached the eyes, and they lit, like twin moons drowned in fog. And then the stone spoke. With the voice of many, "One came before you. One left the box sealed." One ran. Rotvar's jaw clenched. "And if I don't? Then you walk through what he closed, and bear what he fled." The mist around the statue lifted entirely, revealing what lay beyond. A staircase, not down. Inward, into the center of the riverbed, carved from stone, swallowed by time, and lit by the same pale glow that now filled the statue's eyes. Rotvar stared into it. He had followed many paths. This one had followed him back. The first step did not make a sound, neither did the second. Only the third gave off a low, hollow hum, not through his boots, but through his chest, a vibration in bone, not in stone, as if the staircase were testing him, remembering his weight, measuring his intent. The spiral staircase curled gently to the left, vanishing into a corridor of darkness lit only by the faint, pulse-like glow embedded into the rock walls. Each pulse coincided with the flicker of the spiral on his palm. He had no torch, no map, only memory, but not his. The deeper he descended, the more he felt a presence behind his thoughts. Not a voice, but an editor. Something parsing each image in his mind, judging what to keep, what to erase. The walls narrowed, the air warmed, and then came the carvings. At first, simple spirals, lines, hands, repeated across the curved stone. But further down, the glyphs grew more complex, entire scenes. Etched into the walls with painful precision, men kneeling beneath a black sun. Children born with mouths stitched shut. Women weaving bone into thread. A great beast with no face buried in a spiral pit. Each image burned as he passed, not with fire, but with recognition. He knew these were not fables, they were accounts. Records left by those who could not speak aloud what had happened. He reached a platform. The stairs split, one path continued down, the other a doorway. He turned toward the door. It was sealed by ribs. Actual bones, arranged in a fan across the entrance, their tips embedded into the stone on either side. The space between them shimmered a membrane of ash and memory. He reached for it, and before he touched it, it moved. The ribs retracted not with force, but with permission. The veil dissolved. And he stepped through. What lay beyond was not a chamber, not a temple, not a tomb. It was a mirror of a village upside down. Houses suspended from the ceiling like stalactites, doorways dripping water. The ground above them or beneath him was made of woven branches and sinew, forming pathways through the dark, and hanging in the center a stone bell, massive, cracked, etched in a spiral so deep it seemed to pierce all the way through. Beneath it, a pit, round, black, breathing. He approached slowly. As he neared, the spiral on his palm faded. The warmth left him. Only cold remained. The kind that doesn't warn. The kind that waits. He stood at the edge of the pit. Looked down. No bottom. Only reflection. But not of himself. Of a figure. Kneeling, maskless, eyeless, wrapped in rags. Both palms facing upward like offering or surrender. And then, it moved. Rotvar did not. The reflection reached upward. He blinked. And now the pit was empty, only ash. And the bell began to hum, low, uncertain, as if trying to remember the sound it once made before someone swore never to ring it again. Part 5, the bell that sang sideways. The hum deepened, not louder, closer. It crawled up Rotvar's legs, coiled behind his sternum, nestled just below his ribs like a thought he didn't want to think. The bell did not swing, it did not strike. But the air around it shimmered in waves, distorting the space like breath on cold glass. He did not touch it. He simply stood and listened. The spiral on his palm was dark now, not dormant, but reverent, as if even it knew when to fall silent. Around the pit, the woven floor quivered, branches tensed beneath his boots. The suspended village above him, the upside-down homes, the inverted wells. The ghost-like windows began to sway, though no wind stirred. The hum became two-toned, then three, then a chord, impossibly low, a harmony only bones could hear. And something beneath the ash stirred, not violently, not hungrily, but ritually. From within the pit, a finger emerged, blackened, worn, still. Then another, then a head bowed, wrapped in cloth soaked dark with time. It rose slowly, not with pain, but with memory. When the figure finally stood in full, ash poured from its robes like breath from lungs too long unused. Rotvar didn't move, not out of fear, out of knowing. He had seen this shape in dreams that weren't his, in carvings on rocks in places that no longer had names. In the silence that followed every unburied death, the figure raised its hands not to him, to the bell, and then it spoke, not with a mouth, but through the air itself. I was the first to wear the name you buried. I was the last to speak it aloud. The bell shuddered, and from the hollow above, the upside-down homes opened. From each, figures dropped silently, as if the world had let go of gravity for just a moment. Dozens, all masked, all spiraled, all silent. They landed without sound and formed a circle around Rotvar. He looked at each. They looked back with the same absence of eyes. The central figure stepped closer. The ash trailed behind it in threads. You carry the mark but not the debt, yet you walk like one who remembers. So tell us. It reached out, touched the spiral on his palm, and for the first time, the mark burned. Not with fire, but with recognition. Who told you to return? Rotvar did not speak. The truth would not fit in language, so instead he opened his palm, showed the spiral, let it glow. Let it pulse, let it answer for him. The circle of figures knelt. All at once, the bell rang, not in the air, but in the river above, far beyond stone and stairs and memory, and somewhere in a village no longer marked. On any map, a child awoke from sleep. Hand burning. The spiral had passed. Again. Part 6, the room without a door. They stayed kneeling. Not out of submission, but recognition. As though his presence confirmed a fear too old to name. The figure in ash withdrew its hand. Rotvar's palm still burned, spiral glowing like a brand or a torch. He did not ask what came next. He followed. The masked figures rose in silence and turned as one, stepping toward the edge of the chamber, where the bell's shadow fell across a wall of stone. But as they neared it, the stone opened. It did not slide. It did not part. It simply ceased to be, and beyond it, darkness. Not deep, not endless, but flat a room, carved into the stone like an afterthought, smooth, dry, featureless. Rotvar stepped through last. The moment he crossed the threshold, he felt it. The absence. The world here had no sound, no smell, no pull. It did not remember him. It did not care. The ash did not follow. The masked figures remained outside. Only the one the first entered with him. The doorway vanished behind. They were alone. 2 shadows and a silence. Rotvar turned slowly. Where are we? The figure did not answer, but turned its head, and the wall to their right lit up. Not with fire, with images, like smoke trapped behind glass. The wall became a window, not to another place but to a memory. He saw a field, windless, dead. A man stood in the center, clothed in nothing but mud and tattoos. Around him, 7 spirals carved into the earth. At his feet, a child, motionless. In his hands, a blade made of bone and blood. Then the wall blinked. New scene. A woman, bound to a stone seat, open, her lips closed by thread. She hummed, and the stone cracked beneath her. Another blink. The bell unbroken, lowered into a pit by dozens of hands. Each one carved with the spiral, each face turned away. Rotvar clenched his fists. What is this? The figure finally spoke. This is what forgetting cost. This is the price you do not yet remember paying. This is what the silence was built to cover. Rotvar stepped forward, his voice low. Why show me now? The figure turned, because the spiral no longer sleeps. The wall to the left ignited. Not with image, with script, thousands of lines. Etched into nothing, floating in air, forming curves, vanishing, returning. Breathing, glyphs he didn't know and yet understood. He raised his palm. The spiral on his hand responded. Some of the glyphs lit up just a few. But it was enough. The figure stepped back. You are not the first to awaken here, but you are the first who stayed. What happened to the others? They bargained, they buried. They built new truths over broken names. And I? You are the one who will walk backward, through what they left behind. The wall behind him opened, no sound. Only a breath of cold air and a downward passage. He did not ask if he should descend, he simply did. And as he vanished into the next corridor, the room behind him forgot it ever existed. Part 7, what the dust chose to keep. The passage descended without angle, not a slope, a drift. Each step didn't feel lower, just older. The air thickened, not with rot, not with heat, with time. The walls were smooth, but not carved. They had been worn not by tools, but by passage, as if centuries of breath had passed through here without voices, eroding the stone like memory erodes intent. Rotvar did not light a torch. He didn't need to. The spiral on his palm pulsed gently, a pale glow that dimly outlined the path ahead. And though the air was still, he sensed movement just out of reach. Just beyond hearing. Not footsteps, not danger, just presence. After what felt like an hour or a lifetime, the passage opened. The chamber was round, wide, and empty except for dust. Dust so thick it coated the floor in ripples like an undisturbed lake of ash. He knelt, ran a finger through it. The spiral formed behind his touch, then vanished. He stood, moved forward. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal no taller than a man's knee. Flat-topped. On it a slab of polished black stone untouched by dust. It reflected nothing. He stepped closer. His reflection did not appear. Instead, an image began to rise from beneath the stone surface, a moving shape. A man, cloaked, hooded, limping, the man from the fire. Rotvar's breath hitched. The same figure who'd sat beside him after the battle, handing him the bark scroll with the broken spiral. The man who'd vanished without a sound. Now he stood in the image, staring up not at the stone, but through it, through time. And he spoke. "You came further than I did." The voice wasn't a recording. It was present. Rotvar stepped back, hand on the hilt of a blade he no longer carried. What is this? A trace, a weight, a warning. The man in the stone took a step. The image pulsed. You've passed the bell, you've heard the name. You've walked through what they buried, but you haven't seen what the dust kept. The chamber rippled, not visually, historically. Rotvar blinked and the dust began to shift. Across the floor, it flowed to the edges of the chamber, revealing marks burned into the ground. A map, a memory, a ritual, spirals. Circles, names. A single path curling inward to a center point where the pedestal stood. Rotvar turned to the image again. What am I looking at? Where it began. The silence. The man shook his head. No, the choice. He raised a finger in the image, pointed at Rotvar. You carry it now, but you didn't make it. The map on the floor pulsed. One line thin, jagged, began to glow. It curved away from the central spiral, diverged, broke. Rotvar understood. Someone left the path. The man nodded and built a new one. Rotvar crouched, traced the broken line with his fingers. My blood? The man didn't answer. But the glow on the map entered his hand, vanished into the spiral in his palm, and from behind the pedestal a sound. A breath, not his. Part 8, where the break was hidden. He rose slowly from the spiral map. The glow in his palm faded, but the line he had touched still pulsed faintly on the stone floor, a quiet echo of a path once taken and never returned from. The dust had fled from it, afraid to cover what memory demanded remain exposed. Behind the pedestal, the breath sounded again, longer this time, not drawn from lungs, drawn from waiting. Rotvar turned toward the sound. A wall plane, smooth, untouched, now shimmered as if exhaling mist from within. And then, slowly, it melted into an opening. Not a door, not a crack. A softness in the stone, a wound in the world. He stepped through. The room beyond was smaller, circular again. Low ceiling, no carvings. No furniture, only one thing, a chair. Wooden, simple, facing away from him. Something sat in it. Rotvar paused at the threshold. He felt no danger. Only gravity. This place did not want to be entered, but it had allowed him. The figure in the chair spoke. You came the long way. The voice was familiar. Not identical, but nearly. Rotvar stepped closer. The figure's shoulders were wide, posture rigid, cloak rough spun, frayed at the edges. Hands rested on the chair's armrests, knuckles scarred. On the left forearm, the faint shape of a spiral tattoo, half faded. Rotvar circled slowly. The man in the chair looked up, and the world tensed. It was him. Not exactly, but close. An older version. Not aged by time, aged by choice. His face was worn, eyes sharp, mouth neutral. but the expression behind the face that was harder to name. A kind of peace that had cost too much. "You knew I would come?" Rotvar asked. The man nodded. "You had to. What is this place?" "The break." "The break in what?" The older Rotvar the echo. The version that had stayed behind pointed to the wall. Symbols flared into view, a spiral, then a straight line. Then a shattered ring. In the agreement. Rotvar narrowed his eyes. "What did we agree to?" The man stood, slowly, purposefully, to forget. He walked to the wall, touched the shattered ring. When the first silence failed, we were offered a choice. To seal the wound with truth or with forgetting. He turned. "You chose truth." "And you?" The man did not answer. He held out his hand. Something rested in his palm. A small ring made of black bone, etched in tiny glyphs that shimmered only when unseen. Rotvar stepped closer, took it. It was cold, heavy. "What is it?" he asked. The echo answered. "A key." "To what?" "To the door that forgetting locked." A pulse ran through the chamber. The spiral on Rotvar's hand shimmered. The spiral on the echo's forearm glowed in kind. "You are not meant to stay," the older man said. "Why not?" "Because staying here means choosing the silence." The chamber trembled subtly. Dust lifted from nothing. A sound returned to the air, like breath being drawn for the first time in centuries. "Then where do I go?" Rotvar asked. The echo turned away, pointed toward the back of the room. There. The wall had opened, not wide, just enough for one to pass through sideways. As if squeezing between truths. "You follow the ring," he said. Rotvar stepped past him, but just before leaving he looked back. "What happens to you?" The man's echo smiled faintly. "I stay. I keep forgetting, so you can keep walking." And the wall closed behind him. Part 9. The ring that showed no end. The passage ahead was narrow, barely wide enough to walk through, without brushing both shoulders against the walls. The rock here was smooth but irregular, like it had been shaped not by tools, but by removal, as if something had been pulled from the earth long ago, leaving only the corridor in its wake. Rotvar's fingers traced the walls as he moved. They pulsed faintly warm at first, then cold, then warm again. Like a pulse with no body. The ring in his hand vibrated once, then again. He stopped. Before him, the corridor split two paths, identical in shape, in shadow and silence. The ring grew colder, then still. He stared down both tunnels. No markings, no scent, no sound. And then the spiral on his palm glowed briefly, but enough. On the left-hand wall, a faint shimmer revealed itself, a curve, incomplete, a fragment of a spiral, barely visible, even to trained eyes. He turned that way. The ring pulsed once as if in agreement. As he walked, the corridor widened, then rounded, became a gentle curve, until it no longer felt like he was moving forward, but around. It was a spiral. He was inside a spiral, carved into stone. In motionless descent, and at its center a doorway, tall, arching, covered in dust that clung too perfectly. He brushed it aside. Beneath the dust names, dozens, carved deep like wounds. Some were scratched out, some barely legible, and one at the center his. Not Rotvar, not Ragnar, a name he did not recognize. But it pulled at his chest like a string from a buried root. "Who carved this?" he whispered. The stone pulsed. A low, hollow note rang out from the walls, the same tone the bell had hummed in the chamber above. He placed the ring against the door. It fit into a shallow depression, a circle that had waited. The moment it touched the doorway sighed, then dissolved, and beyond it, a hall of mirrors, but none reflected him. Each showed someone else older. Younger, wounded, crowned, kneeling, laughing, dying. All of them carried the spiral. Some wore it proudly, some hid it like shame. Some had cut it from their own palms. He stepped between them. They watched him, not with malice, not with curiosity, but with exhaustion. Each reflection a life he hadn't lived but could have. And in the far end of the hall, beyond the last mirror, stood another version of him, younger, unscarred, eyes wild, full of wrath, wearing armor, holding a blade still red. Rotvar approached. The mirror pulsed. The version inside stepped forward, so did he. And they stared at each other through glass that pulsed like water. The other opened his mouth, spoke one word, "Why?" and vanished. The mirror cracked a fine line across its center. Rotvar stood in silence. And for the first time in this buried spiral, he wondered if his path had ever truly been his. Part 10. The mirror that refused to shatter. The crack in the glass spread slowly, like a river delta etched across frozen water. It spidered outward from the center of the mirror, where the reflection of his younger self had spoken the question that now lived behind Rotvar's ribs. Why? He didn't answer it. There was no one left to hear. But the silence that followed demanded an answer anyway. He stepped past the broken mirror. The corridor beyond was dimmer now, not because the light had changed, but because the spiral inside his palm had dimmed. Not extinguished, just waiting. The hall narrowed again. Became a rib cage of stone and shadow, bones carved into architecture. Runes etched into ceiling beams, and in the gaps between them eyes. Not literal. Shapes, cut into the walls like vents. Openings that led into nothing. Each one a different shape. Round, slit, square, and behind each he felt breath, not air, breath. "They're watching," he whispered. And as he said it, one of the eyes blinked. He froze. It wasn't a reaction. It was a response. He stepped forward. The spiral in his palm burned again, steady, sharp, clean. The eyes blinked again, together, in unison. And for the first time since he had entered this deeper spiral, he felt approval, not praise, but acknowledgement. He came to another door lower than before, narrower. Built for someone smaller, he had to stoop to pass through. Inside a chamber filled with ropes. Hanging from the ceiling, swinging gently through the air was still. Each rope ended in a noose. Each noose held a mask, dozens of them, each one unique. Some carved from wood. Others molded from clay, bone, horn. Each bore different spirals, inverted, doubled, broken, mirrored. None were the same. They did not hang idly. They faced him, and though they had no eyes, he felt them seeing. A pedestal stood at the center. Upon it, one final mask, stone, cracked down the center. Unworn, he stepped forward, touched it. The chamber sighed, and the ropes above twisted, not violently, like necks turning in slow agreement. "You may wear it," came a voice. But the voice came from the mask. It vibrated beneath his hand. "What does it do?" Rotvar asked. "It does not hide. It reminds." "Of what?" "Of what shape your silence once had." He lifted it. It was heavier than it looked. He placed it over his face. And the world blinked, not turned, not changed. Blink. The chamber became water, not drowned, just fluid. The ropes hung upward now, reaching for a ceiling that was now below. The mask spoke all at once. "You have worn forgetting long enough. Now you wear what remembering costs." The spiral on his palm ignited beneath the stone of the mask. And when he opened his eyes, he saw nothing, but heard everything. He did not fall, he did not collapse, but his knees bent anyway, not from pain. From weight. The moment the mask sealed against his skin, the world behind his eyes fractured, not shattered, not broken, just turned. As if reality had taken a step to the side and now stood near, but no longer ahead. He was kneeling, in a room no longer made of stone, but of voices. Thousands, not shouting, not singing, whispering, one atop another, layered like ash over snow. Some male, some female, some neither, some younger than memory should allow. They did not speak to him. They spoke through him, his mouth opened. He didn't command it. Words slid from his throat like water from a cracked vessel. I remember the first spiral. I remember the name that was never taught. I remember walking backward through fire and forgetting only the flame. The ropes above him twisted slowly. The masks hanging from them swayed like heads in windless sorrow. And the room he no longer saw began to take shape in his hearing. He heard walls breathe, he heard dust settle. He heard the footsteps of those long dead pacing, pausing, kneeling, weeping. He heard a hand carve into stone. He heard a child humming with thread through her lips. He heard himself, in a voice too young, crying out a word he couldn't now recall, but it felt like truth. He pressed his palms to the floor. It pulsed. Not stone, not soil, a back. He was kneeling on something alive. Not in pain and patience. Waiting. The weight of the mask made his spine curve, but he stood nonetheless. And then he saw, not with eyes, but with recognition. The chamber returned, but not as it was. Everything was bone white now. The ropes above were vines. The masks were faces real, open-eyed, half-formed, all staring toward a single place, a door, small, wide, beating, softly. He walked toward it. The floor hummed beneath his boots. Not warning, welcoming. The spiral on his palm was now etched into the mask. He could feel it, like a fingerprint of fire against his skin. The door did not ask, it opened, and beyond it light. Not bright, just final, like the last page of a book already read too many times. And as he stepped through, the voices behind him whispered in unison. Now it remembers you. The light beyond the door was soft but absolute, not glowing, not burning. Just present, like a hand resting on your back in silence. Rotvar stepped through. The mask still clung to his face, but it no longer pressed, it hovered. Like it knew he had passed the threshold where masks became unnecessary, where the truth was not worn but carried. The chamber he entered was small, circular, the size of a hut, walls of smooth, pale stone the same tone as old paper left in sun. And at the center a single plinth. On it a book, closed, no dust, no lock. Rotvar stepped forward. The book pulsed once, faintly, as if its heartbeat had just resumed. He did not reach for it, not yet. Instead, he placed both hands on either side of the plinth. The spiral on his palm shimmered, and the book resisted. Not locked, not sealed, just unwilling. You do not write your own ending, came a voice, not from behind, from beneath the book. Low, female, tired, not unkind, but firm, like a gate that only opens once. Then who does? Rotvar asked aloud. The one who dares not read. He looked down at the cover. It bore no title. Only an indentation shallow, spiraled, unfinished. He placed his palm over it. The spiral aligned. A hum began, but not from the stone. From within him. The hum became heat. The heat became pain, but not sharp old. The kind that comes from pressing into something too long. The book opened. Pages of blank parchment unfurled one by one, slow and precise. Each page revealed a single symbol. The first a spiral, the second a ring, the third a knife, the fourth an eye with no pupil, the fifth a gate. Cracked down the center, he flipped further. More symbols, but none of them repeated, not once. He reached the final page. It was empty. He stared at it, and it stared back. Then the voice returned. This is where your story ends. No, Rotvar said softly. This is where I begin to write it myself. The mask split. Down the center. It did not fall away. It faded, like breath returning to air. Rotvar stood now in the full light, face uncovered, eyes clear. The book closed, but not from resistance, from recognition. It knew now that the hand holding the pen no longer belonged to the dead. The book was gone, or perhaps it had never been real. Rotvar stood alone in the white chamber, his hands empty, his skin cooled by a windless air that tasted faintly of stone and root. The spiral on his palm had dimmed to a dull glow, not sleeping, just resting. There were no more doors, no ropes, no mirrors, just a single narrow stair. Leading up, not carved but grown. The steps were made of bark and bone, coiled like vertebrae, creaking faintly as he placed his weight upon them. As he ascended, the light behind him faded, and with each step, the pass grew quieter, until it was not gone, but placed like a stone on a grave, known, honored, left behind. He emerged into a cave of roots, vast, vaulted, lit only by veins of amber sap trickling along the walls, casting dim golden glow across twisted wood. It felt alive, not like a forest, like lungs, breathing, slow, ancient. He walked forward. The roots gave curling around a hollow, and at the center of it, a shape. Not a person. Not a beast, just form. Made of roots, bark, tendons, fragments of antler. Old cloth and breath. It sat, or perhaps hung, suspended inches from the earth, knees curled into its chest. Arms around its head. Spirals covered its surface, hundreds of them. Some burned, some stitched, some bleeding ink. It pulsed, as if it knew him. He approached cautiously. Each step stirred dust that glowed faintly. The shape turned its head. There was no face, only smooth wood, marked with 3 slashes like claw marks, or a forgotten name trying to reappear. Then it spoke, not aloud, inside him. You came further than he did. Rotvar exhaled. Who? The shape twitched, not in pain, in laughter. The one you were carved from. A pause. You mean Ragnar? He was the echo that stayed. Rotvar stepped closer. What are you? The shape answered without words, and for a moment, the truth flooded him like light through cracked skin. He saw. A child born with eyes closed, but knowing. A line of ancestors who each wore the spiral, some proudly, some silently. A field where no one died, but every breath was a sacrifice. A door sealed not to keep things out, but to keep him from returning too soon. And at the center of it all, this shape, waiting, watching. You are the cost, he said softly. It nodded. I am the part that never let go. Of what? Of you. Silence. A silence that hummed. Then why now? Rotvar asked. Why show yourself? The shape shifted and whispered. Because forgetting is no longer safe. The chamber pulsed. The roots quivered. And from the back of the cavern, a crack split open in the wall. Not a door, a wound. Something beyond it breathed long, slow, and aware. The shape turned toward it, then back to Rotvar. This is not your end, no. But it is theirs. The wound in the cavern wall pulsed, not like something bleeding, like something inhaling. Rotvar stood at its edge. The thing of roots and spirals behind him did not follow. It simply watched with no eyes, no mouth, no movement. It had waited long enough. Now it would remain. But something beyond this opening had not waited. It had paced, scraped, listened, and now it was ready. He stepped through. The world shifted, not spatially, historically. The light behind him vanished. The air became still, dry, thin as though no living thing had exhaled here in centuries. The floor beneath his boots was not earth, not stone. It was carved memory. He stood in a vast circular chamber, walls covered from floor to ceiling with names, every inch etched, no space left blank. Some names were scratched out, others layered atop each other, like generations climbing over one another to be remembered. At the center of the chamber, a well, not wide, but deep, black stone rim, polished, untouched by dust. He walked toward it, looked in, saw nothing, then heard it, a voice, soft, male, tired. I thought you'd come sooner. Rotvar froze. He knew that voice, but not from dreams, not from stories. Ragnar? He said, and the name echoed like an oath. No, came the reply. But I wore that shape long before you did. And from the well a shape rose, human in outline, but made of layered names, thousands of them, forming muscles and skin and eyes from all those who had borne the burden before him. Their identities pulsed in the figure's chest, their mouths forming across its arms, their breath curling from its spine like ink. Rotvar did not move. What are you? He asked. The figure stopped rising, hovered just above the rim of the well. The names across its surface shivered. I am what happens when you bind memory to lineage. You're a prison? No, I'm the one who stayed so others could forget. It stepped onto the stone, and where it stood, the ground did not crack, it recoiled, as if history itself refused to hold the weight of it again. So why am I here? Rotvar asked. The figure raised a hand. It bore a spiral, broken, incomplete, burning. Because the forgetting has reached its end, and you are its final breath. A wind stirred in the chamber for the first time, but it moved up, toward the ceiling, pulling dust and names with it. Some of the carved names peeled free, rising into the air like feathers scorched from fire. Rotvar looked up. A hole had opened above, circular. Descending light that wasn't light, but memory remembered. The figure of names stepped aside. "You can climb out," it said, "but when you leave, you must choose." "Choose what? What parts of this you carry? And what parts you let grow without you?" Rotvar stared at the spiral on his palm, then at the broken spiral on the figure's hand, then upward. The wind grew stronger. "What happens if I stay?" The figure smiled. "Then you become me, and if I go, you become something they won't have a word for." He stepped toward the light, and the names on the walls began to call out to him. Not to stop him, to be remembered just once more. He reached for the edge of the well, not to descend, to ascend. The wind pulled upward gently, not forcefully, but insistently, like memory ready to return home. Rotvar placed his palms against the stone rim, felt the etchings of names press into his skin like voices written in touch. He climbed, not with effort, with release. Each movement loosened something, an ache, a doubt, a face he no longer needed to carry. But not everything left. Some names held on, some memories insisted, and that was good. Because forgetting everything is not freedom, it's hollowing. He rose into the opening. The light was not above, it was within. And as he crossed the final edge, the wind stopped. The pull ceased. The world waited. He stood now in a field of tall grass, swaying though there was no breeze. The sky overhead was pale, washed with gray like parchment too often rewritten. The landscape stretched in every direction, familiar and foreign. He looked down, no blood, no dirt, but something was there. At his feet, a spiral formed from stones, old, covered in moss, long forgotten, but arranged with care. At the center, a flat slate. He knelt beside it and found a handprint carved shallow into the surface. Not his, but waiting for his. He pressed his palm to it. The spiral in his skin pulsed once, not with power, with farewell. And the earth responded, not by opening, by remembering. He heard it again. The voice of the shape in the well. "You must choose," and so he did. He stood, looked across the field, and chose to walk forward, not to return. Not to escape, to carry. He no longer wore a mask, but he had become one. A face others would remember, even if they never knew his name. And somewhere far behind, deep in the river's quiet bones, the bell rang again. But this time it rang upward. The field did not end. It curved gently with the land, as if wrapping itself around a truth too large to lie flat. Rotvar walked through grass that whispered against his legs, each blade humming faint fragments of names he hadn't heard in years, or hadn't yet learned. He did not know how long he'd walked. Time here had no rhythm, only resonance. Ahead, a shape appeared, at first just outline, then texture, then weight. A tree, massive, twisted, its branches reached wide, like arms once spread in greeting, now too tired to fall. At its base, a stone circle, low, weathered, broken in 3 places but still complete in form. He approached the tree, placed his hand on its bark. It breathed, and so did he. A crow above. He looked up, but it wasn't a crow. It had no feathers, no eyes. Just the idea of a bird made from wind and sound and smoke. It circled once, then vanished behind a sky too white to hold it. Beneath the tree, he found an object, half buried. He knelt, pulled it free, a bowl, stone. Carved shallow, lined with markings that glowed faintly as he turned it. It bore the spiral, but not his. This one was inverted, unfolding, opened outward, like a shell, like something had finally stopped holding on. He heard a voice again, not the deep one from the well, not the roots, not the bells. This one was small. "Young, you came through." He turned. A girl stood just beyond the circle, barefoot, hair matted, eyes wide but unafraid. She looked familiar, not in face, in presence. "Have we met?" he asked. She shook her head. "You passed near my sleep. You made the river wake." He approached slowly. "Why are you here?" because someone must remember this place from the outside. She pointed to the bowl. Do you know what that is? He looked at it again. A vessel. No, she said. A promise. A pause. One made before you were named. The grass shifted around them, curling inward as if listening. Rotvar knelt and held out the bowl. Then what do I do with it? The girl stepped closer, raised her hand. And from her palm, a single drop of water fell into the bowl. It hissed, then glowed, then sank. You carry it forward, she said. Even if you don't yet know what it will ask. She began to step back, fading as she walked, not disappearing. Just returning to something he couldn't follow. And the wind picked up for the first time. Real wind. With direction. With cold. With purpose. Rotvar turned toward it, bowl and saw in the distance a forest. Tall, green, new. The trees ahead were green, too green. They shimmered like they hadn't yet learned to die. Their branches bent with early spring, despite no season having been named. The wind that passed between them smelled of pine and whetstone familiar. But when Rotvar stepped beneath their canopy, the world did not welcome him. It paused. The bowl in his hand grew heavier, not physically in memory. He moved slowly, weaving between trunks that leaned ever so slightly away from him. The spiral on his palm remained faint, cool, as if the mark no longer needed to speak loudly. It was understood now even by the roots. He heard no birds, no animals. But he wasn't alone. Somewhere between bark and shadow, something watched. Not with suspicion, with curiosity. He passed a fallen tree covered in lichen. Its trunk bore carvings, not glyphs, not spirals, tally marks. Dozens. Some crossed through, some circled. Some recent. He paused beside them, ran his fingers across one fresh, still sharp-edged, and in the silence, the forest answered, "You're not the first to return." The voice came from above. Not the sky, a branch. Rotvar looked up. A figure crouched there, human-shaped, clothed in patchwork leathers, face covered with a half-mask of bone. Their eyes were clear, bright, yellow like river stone under sunlight. "How long?" Rotvar asked. "Since the spiral sank?" "Yes." The figure dropped down, soft landing, no threat. They carried no weapons, only a bundle of cloth heavy, wrapped in thread made of woven grass and ash. Years, generations, depends who you ask. Rotvar narrowed his eyes. "What do they say about the spiral now?" The figure smiled beneath the bone. "Some say it's a story, some say it's a trap. Some say it's sleeping beneath the city that forgot its name." They tossed him the bundle. He caught it. Inside a cloak. Old. Familiar. His own. "You were carried through the forgetting," the figure said. "Some of us walked around it. Why?" "Because someone had to remember from the edges." Rotvar wrapped the cloak around his shoulders. It still fit. But it no longer belonged. "There's a village east of here." The figure continued. "They remember nothing, but they still build the stones." Rotvar nodded. "Then that's where I go next. You won't find your name there." "Good," he said. "I've carried too many." He stepped past them, into the deeper forest. The spiral on his palm glowed once, just enough to cast a faint light across the path ahead. And the trees, this time, did not lean away. They watched, they remembered, they waited. The forest opened, not wide just enough to let him through without resistance. The trees no leaned or recoiled. They stood tall and still, their roots silent beneath the soil, but their presence pressed not in menace, in recognition. Ahead, past brambles and a thinning trail, Rotvar saw smoke. Thin, white, cooking fire, not warning. He approached slowly. The village came into view, small, circular. Modest huts built from pale stone and ashwood. Children ran barefoot through muddy paths. Men mended nets. A woman sang while grinding grain, a tune with no words, only shape. And no one looked at him, not in shock, not in reverence, just normally. As if he were not marked, as if he had always belonged. That was the strangest part. He stepped into the square. An old man with a long beard and spiral tattoos that had long since faded glanced up, blinked, nodded. "You came from the river?" he asked.
From
Rotvar
beneath
nodded. The old man shrugged gently. Some say it's cursed. Others say it's home. What do you say? Rotvar asked. I say it feeds the trees, and the trees don't lie. He pointed toward a stone at the center of the square, flat, black, worn. Upon it a shallow bowl, just like the one Rotvar carried. He approached, placed his bowl beside it. The two did not glow. They did not hum, but they aligned, perfectly. One spiral in, one spiral out. Opposing, complete, a child stepped forward, barefoot. Wide-eyed, not the girl from the memory, but the same feeling. She looked at him. Are you a story? He knelt, sometimes. Will I remember you? He thought a moment, then shook his head. No, but you'll remember what the wind sounded like today. Like what? He smiled, like something that finally stopped whispering. She giggled, then ran off. The old man sat beside him. The forgetting ended, didn't it? No, Rotvar replied. He looked up to the hills beyond, but it's no longer winning. They sat in silence. No monument was built, no fire lit in his name. But that night, when the village ate the spiral bowl in the square filled with water, clear, cold, quiet, and no one questioned it. Because when a river ends without drying, something else has begun. Post-episode reflection after the river. The village did not name him. No stories were told around the fire that night. No child asked where he had come from. No elder wondered aloud what he carried in that spiral bowl. And yet, something shifted. The air, the way the trees leaned. The rhythm of footsteps across the square. Even the dogs, once restless near strangers, lay quietly when he passed. Rotvar did not speak much, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything he had to say had already happened beneath the river in a place the world did not know how to hear. Instead, he helped. Stacked wood, sharpened blades, repaired a roof. Each gesture, not unlike a symbol drawn into snow, meant to vanish. Meant to leave behind only the memory of its motion. One night, the girl with the clear eyes came again. She sat beside him in the grass, near the old stone spiral where they poured water for no reason but ritual. You're not staying, she said. He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. Where will you go? Where forgetting starts to grow again, he replied. Do you know where that is? He looked toward the trees, toward the east. Always. The wind that night smelled of cold stone and wet moss, and the kind of smoke that doesn't rise from fire, but from memory burning off in silence. Later, when the village slept, he stood in the square. The bowl still rested in the center, unmoved, untouched. He poured water into it clear, still, moonlit, and for a moment, it reflected a face that was not his, not anymore. He watched the spiral swirl in the center of the water. It didn't pull him under. It didn't hum. It simply held, then dissolved. And so did the name, not his first, not his last. Just the one that the ground still whispered, when it thought no one was listening. When he left the next morning, no one followed, but the forest opened for him. Like it had been waiting. Like it had never forgotten who once walked beneath its roots, bearing a name carved from river bone and silence. He did not look back, because sometimes the spiral doesn't turn to bring you home. Sometimes, it turns to carry you forward, under the river. The bones still remember, but now so does the wind above them, and that is enough. Post-episode continuation, the road that didn't forget. He walked east, not towards something, but with something. The bowl was empty now, not because it had been poured out, but because it had already given what it came to carry. Some mornings, dew gathered in its curve. Some nights, ash settled along its rim. He never cleaned it. He never tried to understand it. He simply kept it near like a voice that didn't speak, but always listened. The forests became denser, not darker, just older. They bore no trails, but his steps always found rhythm. It was as if the land had decided not to block him. Not because it knew him, but because it recognized that he had passed somewhere deeper than roots go. He didn't sleep easily anymore. Each dream was a room. Each room had a face. And none of the faces were strangers. One night, he saw the well again, not in place, but in memory, the shape of names. The voice made of blood and inheritance. It said nothing this time, only watched, as if waiting to see if he'd try, to become something other than what he already was. He woke before dawn, didn't speak, just kept walking. In one village, they asked him where he'd come from. He answered, from silence. They didn't laugh, they only nodded and offered him soup. In another, they gave him a place to sleep. The man who owned the house stared at the spiral on his hand, then quietly kissed his own fingers and touched his forehead. My son used to draw that before he could write, he said. Rotvar nodded. He still might. The man didn't ask what that meant. But he smiled like he understood anyway. He carried no weapon. But he was never unarmed. The spiral now pulsed when something approached. Not danger reminder. One day, it burned briefly as he passed a ruined stone tower. Inside, he found bones arranged in a circle. None had weapons. All had cups beside them. He did not disturb them. He simply poured water from the stream into his bowl, placed it at the center of their ring, and sat until the wind passed 3 times. Then he left. And when he looked back, the bones were gone. Only a spiral made of ash remained where they had rested. Eventually, he reached a coastline, waves like teeth, cliffs like broken promises, and a town built too high to be safe. He stood at its edge, overlooking the black water, and a voice called from behind. Do you know what this sea is called? He turned. An old woman, cloaked, blind in one eye, holding a crooked staff carved with marks he hadn't seen in decades. No, he said, it has no name, because it once knew too many. She stepped closer. And you look like something it's forgotten. Rotvar didn't reply. She laughed. That's a good thing, child. She pointed toward the water. There's an island out there, used to be sacred. Now it's just heavy with breath and regret. Anyone still live there? No, but something does. A pause. You going? He looked out over the waves again. If it remembers me, then take this, she said and handed him a shard of obsidian. It was smooth on one side, rough on the other. And in its center, a carved spiral, tiny, closed. That'll open whatever tries to stay shut. She walked away without waiting for thanks. He found a boat on the shoreline, rotted but floating. He took nothing else, no oars. No food, just the bowl and the shard. As the tide pulled him out, he watched the mainland blur, but the memory that stayed sharp. Because forgetting, he now understood, isn't what happens when time passes. It's what happens when no one walks back. The spiral doesn't turn because it must. It turns because someone keeps walking, and that someone now is you.